Well, hello again, it's David Willey, the curator from the Tank Museum, and I'm here with, I think this must be about our 9th question and answer session. And yet again, beautiful day here in England, and the sun's out. I've got the dog with me, even if it's out of shot. And in fact, sorry, I'll have to, foolishly, I brought the ball out, keep him busy. So if you're new to this, we are answering question and answer sessions. People are posting questions and I'm trying to find answers for you. Tank Museum's closed. We're going through that preparation at the moment about planning how we're going to open and reopen when exactly. So watch this space. And if you're interested, I've also got some of the things that we sell in our shop. We're an independent charity. And what we're trying to do is also get you guys out there and girls to buy something from our shop, and that helps us keeps us going as a charity at this particular time. And again, I would like to say thank you so much to a lot of you. I know you've been buying things like the Tiger beer, like books, like all sorts of bits and pieces, and I've got a couple of other good ideas. What with Father's Day coming up, that you might want to sort of, either if you're the bloke or the dad, drop hints or ideas of things you might be able to buy that if you haven't bought them already. But as ever, thank you very, very much, those of you who are supporting us. So on with the questions. So let's have a look at what people have been asking us. Someone called Panther590 asks, why did the UK share Chobham armour with Germany and the USA when it was secret? This dates back to actually 1970s. Chobham armour is a laminate armour that is a very, very clever system, very effective, has a number of components in there, still officially in the UK top secret. What happens, the Americans were putting together the XM1 programme. We hadn't fitted it to an in-service tank yet in Britain, but there was design process that was going on for a number of other vehicles at the time, including one that was going to be built for the Shah of Iran that would have had Chobham in as well. What happens is the Americans on a visit are shown Chobham, and that means they go back and actually rechange their plans for what becomes the Abrams, and Chobham is included in that. And basically the rule was, or not the rule so much, it was we were sharing. Don't forget, this is a time of NATO, still a time where the big threat was from the Warsaw Pact, Soviet Union, and the idea that we were sharing ideas to a certain degree, technology, etc. And so if this was going to make an Allies tank better, yes, we did do that. It's interesting because, of course, they're not ever published what those levels of cooperation are and to what degree. It only comes out historically what was done. And I believe, and again, this is if you go to different sources, different people say the Germans were brought in on the Chobham sort of information as well, but other parties weren't, which is quite interesting as well. So it's that idea about, you know, who you think you can, not so much word trust, but who you think you want to bring on board. And again, when you think about it logically, there's no point giving certain types of tank information to non-tank deploying countries. So, you know, if they're not building tanks or anything, they don't need to know some of these things. But yes, we did. It was shared with. It was obviously done at very high level because of this being top secret. You know, and if you notice on you know, we got documents in the archive. It says things like UK, Canada only, or UK eyes only. So those different levels of what type of material, ideas, technology can be shared and where it can't be shared. But Chobham has been, obviously, it's gone through subsequent developments, and even though we tend to use that as a very generic term for certain types of laminate armour, actually what's being used now is very different to that old original specification Chobham. So I hope answers that one. Let's move on. Someone says here, if we could choose some more Soviet era tanks, what would we go for? Throw the ball again for Finn. What would we be going for? We do have a wish list, and on that wish list, I think there's some vehicles we know we're never going to get a complete lineup. I mentioned things like, you know, T-44. So during the course of when they were building T-34s, before they went on to the T-34-85, almost the evolutionary development of the turret with the 85mm gun, they actually thought about building a completely separate tank called the T-44. They were built in smallish numbers, etc. That's one of those ones in that Soviet design philosophy. It's a real step change from the T-34 series, or the way they looked. So it goes across to things like It's got torsion bar suspension. It's got gets rid of the co-driver's position. It's got a different shape, and we're starting to get that recognisable frying pan-shaped turret that then leads on, and you see more pronounced in the T-54 tank. So that, evolutionary for Soviet stuff. T-44, they were actually limited production runs, so it's not just there's one or two prototypes around out in Russia. So one of those, for example, would be really interesting. Not core to our story, I would argue, but it's fascinating to see that. But what would be really core to our story is one of those late war Soviet tanks like a JS2 or JS3, and then of course something like a T10 tank, because they influence the West's way of approaching armour and what the potential threat in that Cold War era is going to be. So those are tanks that I do think would really, be high on our list. And we've made efforts to try and get hold of a JS2 or JS3. And again, these things, it's not impossible. They might happen. We're missing a T64 at the moment. I think there are a couple around the place in the UK that we may end up getting one of those. And of course, when you're talking about that Soviet era stuff, leading on to things that at some point will probably end up, a T80 and all the later ones. But the idea at the moment, because of the embargoes, sanctions, etc., the chances of us doing any sort of swap with the Soviet Union, or Russia as it is now, is pretty limited. But there are other countries, Ukraine, etc., where there's other vehicles sitting around the place, and that may be possible to do these things. So at the same time, I come back to other question and answer sessions. We do have to be careful about space. We are just already, even though we built that lovely great big vehicle conservation centre, already we're chocker in there, we're really full. And so the idea of just thinking, that would be lovely to have that, it's got to really get over a big old threshold before we add yet another thing the size of a whole tank to the collection, unless it's got another use for us in another way. So that's the sort of thing. So yeah, there's quite a number of Soviet era vehicles that would still be quite interesting for us to try and acquire. One of those countries, obviously Russia now, is carrying on building material. It'd be nice to see a Marta one day, wouldn't it? Somebody asked a question about my bookshelves, wanting to have a look in there. And people commenting how messy they all are. You saw nothing. You want to see the other room with them all over the place. So I maybe at some point I'll try and get the camera along the shelves for you and everything. But takes me straight on to what are the books I've got on my shelf and everything. I put up some more shelves at the weekend, had a bit of a sort to try and tidy things up. I'm still very random. I never quite put things together like a library. But one thing that did interest me was, people are always interested in what books I've got on my shelf. This was one we've got in the shop, and you can see it's all still cellophane wrapped and everything. That's one that actually, no, I took it off my shelf. This is my copy to show you, because I've mentioned it before. Sometimes I think it's worth spending a little bit extra on the book with the really good quality images in that are printed well and to a good size. And it just so happens the captioning in here is really good as well, so these guys know what they're on about. And that's where I would recommend. So there's one of those books there. I've taken this one. This is my copy off my shelf I've bought. It's part of a series, but they're looking at those Tiger heavy tank battalions. And I know lots of you out there, you love Tiger tanks and everything, but those are ones where they've particularly got good quality prints reproduced, well captioned, and a good size. So if you're a model maker, you're particularly interested in certain vehicles and everything, rather than a slightly grey blurry shot, or a badly produced one, or as I've said before, sometimes the cheaper end of the market. Sometimes it's great, other times you think, well, hang on, I've just spent all that money getting one or two new images and they weren't very good printed in either. So that's one, if you've got the money available, that's one I'd strongly recommend if you like your Tiger tanks. Great. And it's part of a series where they're following the Tiger units, and as many images as they can on that unit in those different areas they're fighting in. And here we go again. I've lost the ball. Oh, there it is. Go on, Finn. So on to another question. Richard Meyerhoff asks, he sort of says, have we ever thought of an idea of showing the design of a tank from specification to production one, Actually, it's something, if you go to our museum when you have the opportunity to, or if you have the opportunity, that's what we do in the tank factory. So you really want to see that exhibition there, which is where we've got certain types of vehicles where you see that evolution development. Got a drawing office, got other things. We've got the lineup of, you know, prototype vehicles. We've got some, I think there's about 3, 4, and then there of ferrets, about, you know, 3, 4 Centurions. That idea of showing how things develop and how they're put together, that's the whole idea of that whole hall. So if you've got the opportunity, Richard, that's exactly what we do in that tank factory, to show how things are put together and developed and built as a tank. Chris Abram asked a question about drawings of vehicles. He was, you know, with the idea of if you're trying to replicate something one-to-one, put the ball down. Put it down, go on, good boy. Fit, drop it, drop. No, he's not interested now, you see. All right, you stay there then. So yes, so he asked a question about, have we got the plans and would we make those plans available? Yes, we do this already. The archive and library, sadly closed at the moment. We do things, and we've done them for a number of years, mainly for modelers, things called plan packs, which are lots of the diagrams, drawings, etc. to scale that we've got on individual vehicles. But we also have a stunning archive of fiches with the blueprints, the original blueprints that were copied from most of the FE series of vehicles, British ones. We've got some other countries' blueprints, some are sadly, you know, not survived that well. Some ones that were photographed, captured documents, photographed, put in the archive, different standards sometimes along those ways. So the key answer is if you're interested in a particular vehicle, when the archive's back up and running, ask us. It may take time because, of course, copying some of those fiches, getting the drawings done, they're not all just sitting there, they're not all digitised. It's doing that, it's just not that easy with the staffing and the amount of time it takes, etc. So, but we can probably do that, and that'll be one of those interesting things, as we touched on doing replicas and everything in the future, is when are those drawings useful? And that's another thing I know some of you doing there. Any drawing sometimes can be helpful, just giving measurements, but one of the really interesting one is this confusion and complexity of taking an original blueprint and turning it into something like a CAD drawing or something that's actually usable today. And even that's not just that simple process. There's quite a bit that goes on there, but having that original drawing, for whether it was for the manufacturer or other ones, that can really help, obviously. And we have a stunning collection in the archive there. As I mentioned, with the British Tank Museum, that's where the main area of holdings is, but we've also got drawings in a lot of other areas as well. So it's always worth asking us a question. And inevitably, I would say we charge for that, you know, because obviously if we're going to do that service, it means we've got to employ someone to do all that copying, etc. So there will be a fee for charging for those things. Marcel Q says, have you ever fired a tank gun? What's the most impressive tank gun you've fired? Careful what I say here. No, I've never certainly fired a tank gun in anger. I've never fired one on the range. I've fired other things, but not a tank gun. So I can't really tell you what's most impressive. Having said that, I've been at a lot of live firings, and as any of you know, if you've been around a real tank when it's fired, real ammunition, it's shock and awe, all those phrases that come out. It's very hard, you know, when you look at footage and photographs and everything else. What's that? You know, when you feel the ground shake, when you feel your lungs go, etc. All of those other elements that, however clever we are, it's very hard to get across of the sensation of a tank. And of course, some of those things are what make up a tank being the weapon system it is. In other words, it's psychological impact. You hear the noise of that gun, you hear the engines, hear the tracks, way it moves. All of that is part of its impact, which is back to one of the other arguments. I know it's not the question you asked, but one of the other things when people say, you know, do we really need tanks anymore, etc., etc. We may not in some circumstances, but quite often people take a tank because its sheer presence, its threat, its ability, its noise, demonstrating it means it gives you that edge, and people tend to back off. So it's another one of those systems in the armory that you hope you don't have to use. But just having it there makes people sort of, you know, not necessarily want to challenge you. I'm going to have a slurp of my tea, sorry. I'm trying to do this a little bit earlier in the morning, so the sun's in a slightly different direction here, but it's another lovely day. So some of my tea in my I Love Tanks mug. And I know of you all around the world, if you do want your tea, nice tea ration tin. This particular one I believe is Ceylon tea that we've got in there from our shop, but we've got other types of tea as well, so have a look there, and a nice tin for you to use afterwards. And it even gives you on the back there instructions for how to make tea, because I know everybody makes their tea in different ways. In Britain we tend to do it, a bit of milk, tea, and some people put sugar in. Don't put sugar in. But again, even on here it says brew the tea for 3 to 4 minutes. You see everyone's got different things. Sometimes if it's a tea bag, almost like, give it a good old dunk, get it there, get a good colour in the tea. But 3 to 4 minutes, I think it's half cold by then, isn't it? Anyway, but right, back on with questions. But don't forget, you can buy the tea. Doug JB asked what gin Finn drinks, because I mentioned about us having our drink problem the other day. Let's go into gin. Do you want us to go into gin? I'm not sure we got it on the website, but we even sell gin in the Tank Museum shop. And we've got the whole thing about gin, why everyone loves talking about gin, is it's come back with a big sort of fashion thing as well. You suggested Gordon's, typical British. So London distilled gin is one of those gins which has got a very English association, British flavour, as it were. That's what we're used to drinking in Britain. Of course, we've been doing a lot of cooperation with Sursterberg, our head of collections is Dutch. Every time he goes back home or goes over there for some reason, I always get him to pick me up a bottle of Dutch gin. The botanicals, in other words, those little herbs and flavourings that are in Dutch gin are so different to the British ones. And that's why, like with all these different things, the unexamined life is not worth living. What is it that is making those different flavour gins? What is it about that we like this one? When you try Dutch gin, if you're used to drinking London distilled gins, i.e. Gordon's and things like that, and then you try Dutch one, it's very different thing. Have another glass. See, it sort of kind of mellows on you. By the third glass, it's really, really good, this other stuff. It's one of those other topics, like wine, like everything else, where a little bit more palate, a little bit more flavour. Why do I like this one? What's that one? How can I define those differences? And of course, myself and Finn, we talk about this most evenings, ad infinitum sort of stuff. Well, actually, I won't say he talks. He comes some sort of, growls about this and sort of barks about that sometimes. But most of the time, he just sort of putting his ears back, sort of rub his chin, and we talk about it, and he agrees with me most of the time. But yeah, so. Another whole topic there, Jim. We better not get into that. I'll see if we've got any for on the shop next time. But we do some beautiful presentation gins as well in the Tank Museum shop. Watcher Zero asked the question about, when we were talking about gate guards, the fact they always suffer and fall apart. Oh, hang on, he's giving me the ball here. Go on then, Finn. Go. He's asked the question about, have we thought of any of those clear coatings for putting over the top of them? I'd be fascinated if anyone out there has a positive long-term experience with putting on, whether it's a clear lacquer sprayed on or whatever, onto a large metal outside object. Because the history really has been, and if you talk about in museum fraternities, everything else, over time, a lot of those preservation type of, whether it's a chemically, not like ship varnish, but polyurethane varnish, all sorts of different ones and everything. A lot of time when they start degrading, the problem of getting them all off from every last, nook, cranny, crevice, the way they flake, the colour, things, everything else, is probably more problematic than just trying to give something another spray coat of paint. But the idea of this, magical, if there was some form of preservation, a lot of stuff, if it's inside or on open display, so things called Renaissance wax, a very fine wax is fine for, unpainted metal surfaces, armour, as in medieval armour, things like that. There's certain types of very fine wax, which again, are easy to remove if you have to remove them. But I still don't know of someone coming up with something, because a lot of them look great initially. They do their job initially, But then you come to that long, is it 5 years, is it 10 years later, when they're starting to degrade, and inevitably they will outside, what are the things you can do about that, and are they more problem than they're worth? So if anyone's got good experiences of being able to coat things that are going to stay outside, you know, do let us know, we'd be interested. Right, Finn, come back round here, come on, give us the ball. That's it, good boy. Right, next question. Herbert Johnson says, do I really wear the slippers? I'll be honest, like most of you who've bought those slippers, I bet you're saving them for best. So my normal household slippers are in such disgusting states of repair. I glued the sole back on, they're kind of moccasin things, but so I have to be honest and say they're my daily wear. The tank slippers tend to be special things for best, or if you're just going to want to show someone, you know, off to someone. Zephyr, I believe the name is, asks, what's the colours of tools on tanks? Were they painted or not? I had a look at some of the imagery, and I hate to say it's horses for courses. There's in some pictures, you can definitely see the tools have been painted, same colour it looks like as the vehicle, probably, you know, in larger production run things, that same colour, it'll be an olive drab for American vehicles, etc. In other photographs you can see they're not necessarily painted, they're in a factory finish of like the bare wood on the handles, or again, you know, we have a tendency these days to paint the surface black. Actually, you know, you use a tool a fair few times and paint's not going to last on the edge of whether it's an axe or a shovel or spade, etc. So even though we like presenting things in a certain way, they probably weren't done that way, or they certainly didn't after the initial factory finish to seal them do anything that side. And we've also seen one or two items where they've obviously left the factory in red oxide and never been painted, even though one assumes they were expected to be painted sometime later. So I hate to say there's a woolly answer there, because time, factory, different countries, different end results, but have a look around. That's another good thing about why you study some of these nice photos in some of the books. You can start seeing, even if it's only in black and white, but you can start telling that look like it's a painted surface. There's another issue there, drop it, that also I find interesting as well, which is where sometimes, you know, we've got some of the original wartime wooden boxes that were issued with stowage, etc., or ammunition in, and of course, you know, they've got the original stencils and everything, but they never looked like that when they were being used in service, because when they were made with new pine, which again, just think of, you know, if you've got any pine in the house, when you first bought it, put it up, used it, unless you stained it at the time, very different to the colour it goes over the years. You know, it mellows, it gets that honey colour, etc. So that's what I always find interesting, because some of these reproduction companies, they do these beautiful crisp boxes, and of course that's how it would have looked at the time, to the point that actually in some imagery you can see that they actually stained the wood because they were too white. You know, they were literally almost sort of, you know, jumping out at you, and they started wanting toning them down. But things got dirty very quick being used, or, you know, like a lot of these things, what was the one that, you know, supposed to be backloaded, 5 minutes later it's being chopped up, bit of wood for the fire for that evening. So with a number of these things, careful that we might have original material today, but the look of it is going to be different if you're trying to do paint matches, etc., than how it would have been when it was first issued back in the war years. Keith Walker mentions the fact he said, you're absolutely right, Keith, he saw a Centaur at Pegasus Bridge. British tank, the Centaur, it's got the Liberty engine in the back. It's part of that Cromwell family. Basically the engine, what was going to be the Meteor, wasn't quite ready, so they were building the Cavalier, then the Centaur, and the Cromwell is really what they wanted to build. And these are kind of like Cavalier and Centaur interim models. The Centaur does see service, because what they did was Montgomery thought it would be a good idea if these tanks were used for bombarding the beaches for D-Day, put onto landing craft. They'd already had their engines removed. Some of these were rebuilt to make Cromwells. They'd already had their engines removed, those Liberty engines. they put them back in because they realised, well, actually, if we bothered to take them all the way across the channel just as a sort of, mobile artillery piece, let's put the engines in case they're necessary to go ashore. And they were manned by the Royal Marines Armoured Support Unit, and they do go ashore, and actually they're in action quite a bit longer than was first expected in those first few weeks in Normandy. And the other thing about the Centaur, why that one at Pegasus Bridge, why these things are interesting in remembering some of these things, is that they have this odd paint system on the edge of the turret with these, it's degrees going all the way round the turret with a line down and a number on, and that's so that someone outside the tank could be calling through to the tank commander to say 5 degrees left, we need a round over there type thing, and that would be a help for external observers to actually get information to the tank so that it knows where it needs to be turning and firing that gun, sometimes 95mm howitzer on there. And there is one, and I meant to look up the story, sorry, we were involved once when they were trying to get it repainted, about that particular tank, but they're at Pegasus Bridge. I'm not sure if it's still actually there, because sometimes they move these gate guard ones, and some have moved to where the new museum is. It used to be just opposite the lovely Café Gondry, is it? I think at the house there. Where's the popcorn again? There you go. Go on, off you go. So does that lead me on to any of the other lovely? Oh, okay. So sorry, the shell's still there. I was just trying to remember which ones I was supposed to be talking to you about. Pete Sullivan asked, did Britain and France consider rear-facing machine guns like the KV-1? Don't forget, Britain does it first. Mark V's got a rear-facing machine gun out the back. In the 1930s, they look at the idea again, especially for the idea of, if you look at the multi-turreted tanks, where is your enemy going to come from? Japanese do it with the Hargo, for all-round defence. It's back to this, the ultimate aim is the enemy's in front of you most of the time, and therefore, well, that's where you put most of your firepower. Even if you do, again, close-in fighting, number of vehicles still have things like pistol ports or secondary armament that you can use through. Doesn't have to be a fixed thing, so if you're taking a Bren gun with you, etc., firing it through a pistol port or a Thompson or whatever in a number of other vehicles. But the way the question's worded, the KV-1 wasn't the first one that had it. Lots of countries have had the idea before then. Malok, I think it is, asked, is there any definition of what a high velocity gun is? And it's a tricky one, that, because actually it's another one of these moving feasts. What was high velocity at one point, as time moves on, not really a high velocity anymore. So it's velocity is that interesting one. It's about the speed something goes to its target, not just the speed, but how quickly it's going to get on that target. The issue there is, as tank guns, the aim really is the more velocity, the more chance that your round, if you're firing armour piercing, is going to penetrate, and the more velocity tendency as well, the greater the distance it's going to go. Now, there are so many things that interact on ammunition and guns. So if you do one type of thing to improve, like the length of a barrel, you think is going to improve accuracy because it's got more time to actually centre that round than a shorter barrel. All these types of issues, if you add or change the specification in one area, it quite often means there's a change or a knock-on effect in another area. Because someone else asked the question, for example, why didn't we, after we found discarding Sabo ammunition and started to put that into operation, why didn't they do a round for the Sherman? Well, discarding Sabo ammunition needs a lot of kinetic energy, welly, behind that round when it's fired out, because of the build structure of the 75mm. It's not that 75mm can't fire discarding Sabo, but because that's in essence a medium velocity gun on the Sherman, that's why they couldn't put that type of round in it, because it needs so much kinetic energy behind it. In other words, a bigger case almost, to get it out the end of the barrel. That barrel structure is not built for that, but it was built for a really good HE round, which is why we still love the 75mm on the Sherman, even though we're putting 6-pounders and then reaming out 6-pounders, so we can then take the 75mm ammunition that the 6-pound to fit the new reamed out 6-pounder round gun barrel, if you see what I'm saying. So it's one of those ones where not everything's going to work in that way. So the idea you can backtrack. Other things you can do as well, which is of course with some weapon systems like the 2-pounder, they up its potential armour piercing role by adding the Little John projector, which then has the idea of squeeze bore, as it's sometimes called. So the effect of the cartridge is still the same. That's the amount of explosive that's in that brass case. That forces out a slightly oversized round with a soft outer, hardcore inner, and as it's projected, it's squeezed down to shape, and it gets the full velocity, the full force behind it as it leaves the end, and it ups the penetration ability of that original 2-pounder gun. So sometimes you can add things there. Again, I think that answers that question. It also touches on a couple more. And by the way, sort of that does give me the excuse to talk here and there about one or two of the other things I've got on the table, which a lot of these issues are discussed in our Haynes manuals, because of course firepower is one of those really important areas. So if you do look at German, how they're upgunning the Panzer III from what it is 37mm as it goes through right the way to a short barreled 75mm at the end of its career. That's all written about in these Haynes manuals very well, and I mention those ones because we've got a new stock of some Haynes in. This one by Jonathan Faulkner on some of the technology behind D-Day. That's a cracker as well. Jonathan's the editor of the series. One on the T-34 we've got there. I think I've already mentioned, look at them. They're very, very well put together, beautifully illustrated, great price for what you're getting, the amount of information, the quality there. And so there's tank ones there, but we've brought in another load of ones. So I know a lot of you like aeroplanes as well. There's one on Stukas. There's other ones there. So do look on the website because they're very good, and especially because some of those questions, what is it? Why do certain guns change at the different times? Where do they fit in with their overall structure? Which kind of sort of also brings me on to a young lad called Charlie Crabtree. I met him at our modelers event earlier in the year, and he's sent in a question where they were debating, which we all do, and everybody sort of goes on, was this a better tank than that one? What was the reasoning behind this, etc. And he was asking, the carload of them coming down, was the Sherman a better one than the T-34? What would have come out best? And I often get asked this, and one of my answers on this one is that it's such a complex question because you have to take in so many other features than just that end product. There is no point us talking about something like the Sherman or the T-34 if you haven't picked up on all the thought process, the conditions behind it. So the Sherman, for example, 30 tons. You're looking at, again, we always compare it to some of those late war German tanks, etc. Bigger, heavier, more powerful guns. The Sherman was designed in the United States where it was going to be built, because the United States was not being bombed. Roosevelt's line, arsenal of democracy. This is a product that we can build here safely and securely, but we're going to have to ship it all around the world so that it can actually operate, so in the Pacific or to Europe, so it can do its job there. That's where the fighting's going on. So there was no point them building a tank that is so heavy that most of the ships, or the dockside, or the equipment, or the derricks, or the railways that are going to have to manoeuvre all this stuff around the world can't cope. 30 tons they could. So you see that as a design criteria is different to what some of the other countries are coming up with as part of their design criteria. So when you're putting these two things against each other, if you don't know that background or what their thought processes were, or the other thing is how they're going to intended to use it, then sometimes when we're just doing a one against one top trumps type comparison, we're missing a lot of the regular other parts of the arguments. How does it fit in with the rest of an armoured force? What's the doctrine? How do they think they're going to use this weapon? And what works for them, or how do they adjust themselves so that they get the best from that item? And that's again one of these things, so that just comparing, trying to get like with like is really, really problematic. Because there are times, of course, if you're talking about a one-on-one tank battle, very rarely happens, but those issues then, how thick's my armour, is my gun going to penetrate that one, the enemy tank, etc., they are vital, life defining moments. But for the vast majority of the rest of the time, that just doesn't happen. It's just, you know, the one-on-one situation. But there's a countless other things that are going on that influences whether that vehicle might be judged a success or failure, or how it's going to be used. And we quite often, dare I say, forget all those other factors that come into play. So it's a tricky question, because, you know, we're bound to have to talk about, was this more successful? Why do they try and do things? How does it fit in? But you need to look at all those issues, because you can argue T34, if you look at the number of them knocked out, it's a failure, if you want to look at it that way. You know, in many other countries, they'd lost that many tanks and tank crew, but the Soviet Union could carry on training men, because it's got so many men to train, providing new tank crews and building replacement tanks because of their industrial capacity. So for them, it is a successful design that undoubtedly wins through in the end, because it wins, you know, they're on the winning side. So it's you know, there's very hard to actually judge like with like. So Charlie, I don't know if that helps at all answer your question. Probably giving you 101 more questions, but it was lovely meeting you. And I gather, I haven't seen it yet, I gather you've posted somewhere your own tank chat you did when we were down there at the in front of the Tiger, so I'll be looking out for that. Right, and I think I have got through most of the questions I was going to be asked. There was a couple of other things I wanted to bring up, other than, oh, here we go again with Finn, sorry. A couple of other things coming up. So I mentioned the fact Father's Day is coming up. So what is it, the things you can get there, which is going to cause me to jump up in a moment. I was going to wear these, but I just thought it'd be so ridiculous to try and show you. And I don't know what hour of the day is it. You know, a shapely ankle might not be the time of day for you. We have now got Tank Museum socks. Get my words out. There's the other one that goes with it, but I've cut out a bit of cardboard so you can see the light, and I'm going to jump up along with another item I want to show you, just so you can get a closer look. There you go, on our Tank Museum. Hopefully that's focusing in on autofocus. You've got Tigers, you've got Churchills, you've got Shermans, you've got everything else. So imagine the delight you can have. I think I've already lost the label, it's come off, but it's 80% cotton, so they're proper pucker socks with a bit of elastoline in there. Has the label come off? Yeah, I don't seem to have lost the label, because it says something like authentic Tank Museum, you know, officially approved socks, as opposed, so don't go buying those unapproved socks if you find any out there. But there they are, perfect present, and you can imagine all you guys sitting there sort of, you know, adjusting your trousers or being able to comment to one another saying, oh, I think you're showing just a little bit too much Churchill at the moment, or whatever. So great idea there for Father's Day, if you want to buy that one. I have what was the other Father's Day present I was just going to show you? I've already, oh, here we go. I meant to bring those up with me as well, which I keep meaning to wear these. You can get your Tank Museum cufflinks as well. So there's the cufflinks in a box set there. I've been wearing them a couple of times, and every time I forget to show them off. As well as, of course, all those other wonderful things we've been selling, some of which I've been telling you about before. We're going to do a really good offer as well. Here's another one if you're feeling guilty, Monopoly and Cluedo. If you buy both of them together, we're knocking a whole £10 off the price. So limited time, but that's another one of those ideas. Of course, what Father's Day present, who wouldn't want his 17-pounder inflatable round, or we've got the 88mm, or a Sherman round as well. There you go. We have, of course, as ever, all those usual things. This one unfortunately started melting in my bag. Yeah, it's melted. Get your chocolate. There's Centurion, there's all the different types of chocolate there. And as you are sitting there looking astute in your cufflinks and your Tank Museum, you get out your pen. This was the other one, and however close, I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. This is one of those lovely pens where if you turn them up and down, if I do it that way, I've got a Tiger 131 driving all the way down here. If I go the other way, you're not be able to see any of this, are you? But anyway, so don't forget your stationery as well. So you can have your Tank Museum pen or your Tank Museum ruler, just in case you forget during the course of your homework or whatever it is you're doing, what a Churchill, A7V, a Tiger, a Sherman and a Mark IV look like. So as we go along there, and we do also have there, I believe, for sale, You can't even see what that is, but it's actually one of those classic car stickers. My other car is and you've got a Tiger tank or whatever, so we've got those ones there as well. And I would always, again, especially if you're just thinking of Father's Day, general interest, bringing people in, I keep mentioning it, have a look at our new guidebook. I don't know if any of you have bought this. If you want to make comment on it, tell other people what you think about it. I think it's great. I think it's genuinely, and for the money you get there, you've got a fantastic history of the tank, and lots of really good issues in there. So I know I brought that one up before, but I'll bring it up again because I do think that's another, if you're umming and ahhing or putting together something in your basket in the shop, that's one, do add to it, because I think you'll be impressed by that as well. So, but do comment, those of you who've already bought it. And I've always brought it out again because, again, different ranges, different levels of interest, Tank Spotter's Guide, a lot of really good information in there. David Fletcher does it, so you know there's a lot of good stuff there. Just being able to take you through, again, if you're getting into tanks, what do they look like, what were they designed for, what are they there. So I think I've covered off all the questions I was going to ask or trying to get through today. We'll keep these going. As I say, we're still looking now at when we are going to open. We'll keep these going as long as we possibly can at the moment. I repeat at the end there, thank you so much of you who've already bought some of this product, helping us, keeping us going. Or I mentioned the t-shirt, another t-shirt there, another different design. Have a look there if you're into your t-shirts or hoodies, they're all on the website. Thanks if you have bought stuff, do keep in touch. It's almost reading the comments now, it's almost like some of the people we know, you know, like hello Bill from Iowa, Rosie and all these other people that are regularly putting comments there. So thank you. If you're new to it, do have a look, do support us, do subscribe, do all those things you're supposed to. And I know some of you have very kindly given us donations as well. Have a look at that Patreon scheme or join one of our membership things as well, if you have that opportunity. If you don't, thank you for watching. Thanks for the support anyway. Do write your comments, do carry on asking the questions. And Finn, come here a second. He's just interested in his ball. Come and say goodbye. Come around here. I know you're very interested in the dog and you're not really interested in me. Come on, up you come. So Finn says goodbye as well. And if all goes well, we're going to go off fishing in a moment, aren't we? Yeah? Okay, but he's more interested, I have to say, in the ball. Thank you. In these difficult times, obviously your support is really valued. So please do keep following us on social media, do subscribe to our channel. And if you've got the opportunity, perhaps order something from our shop, join one of our schemes like Patreon or our Friends organisation, and we'll try and keep going with giving you some content to keep you informed and entertained.